ADNA Presents. Today we have a very special guest, John Stark. He has the website, YouTube, and many other reviews called Mac the Movie Guy. So honored to have you here, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What do you love about audio description?
Well, what I love about audio description is that as somebody who, I got a film degree, a legitimate film cinema studies degree. I used to be able to see, and now I can't. And I love that audio description allows me at least to stay in touch with as many media outlets between TV and film that otherwise I would have a really hard time watching without audio description. I still feel connected to the thing that I love so much. And I get to watch these new films, and I'm not just sitting there and listening to Jurassic Park over and over because I remember what it was like when I watched it, back before I was blind. So that's what I love about audio description is it makes it so accessible for audiences when it's really good.
How has your film degree contributed to your experience of film now as a reviewer? I'm curious if there's been, like, for example, I'd imagine as getting the film degree that you get to learn a lot about the visual, the audio, the directing, the script, the process. And I know there's no way to condense that experience into an interview. It's an unfair question, but just curious about how your film studies has contributed to your reviews.
Yeah, it's interesting because I even look back at my experience going to school and I'm like, what would I do now? Like if I wanted to be a cinema studies major, and I think about audio description and how many films I saw that feel so off the beaten path that would never have had audio description. I don't think anybody bothered to audio describe them. I actually had a class I was required to take called Avant-Garde Cinema. And it was just all of these really sort of out in left field concepts of film. Sometimes they weren't even really film. They were just filmmakers who would make entire films out of just burning the actual film itself. There was a film that was just like a static shot of a building, just like 8 hours of one building. So, I mean, obviously those films aren't being audio described, but at the same time, I would have had a really hard time in that class without it. So I look back at those classes now and I'm like, I guess I'm glad that I did it when I could, because now if I was to try to ask for audio description for all these things, I don't know what I would get. I don't know. I mean, I feel like they'd have to try to accommodate me, but at the same time, I just don't know the answer to that question. So I'm glad I got to do it, but it shaped me just through having a more well-rounded look at film. Because I think when we approach things as an audience, sometimes you approach only what you want to see. And if you approach it sort of as a critic, you approach it from a what's new, what's hot in theaters, or do I want to be a specific kind of critic that talks only about one thing? Like there are a lot of websites that focus just on horror movies. So obviously they're just going to watch a lot of horror movies, so they can get kind of in one niche. But in film school, they try to make sure that you get a little bit of everything so that you understand a little bit of how like production works, how all of these different styles of film work, and you end up watching films in different languages and across all the different decades from different filmmakers. So it just really rounds you out a lot better so that you can say that I've seen that. So that's what I think really shaped me, is that I've seen some really interesting, bizarre things. I didn't necessarily like everything that I saw, but I think it definitely helped shape me so I don't have such a narrow vision of film.
I love how you distinguish between yourself being a critic and audience. If we could specifically talk about film and TV AD, what I'm hearing is that there are times when you do trust the audio description in the sense of I can trust that I'm being carried along in the story and immersed in the story and understanding what's happening because the AD is strong, whether that's the writing, the voice talent, the mix, the timing, the engineering. Could you talk as a critic about what makes a trustworthy audio description experience in that context?
It's such a spectrum. There's a lot of really sort of half-done audio description out there where you get a brief introduction where you're like, and in the classroom, and that's it. And that's all you get. And then the scene just goes and things happen in the classroom and they don't really ever update you. And sometimes it's because I know the audio description doesn't want to talk in top of dialogue, but at the same time, it can go for a while and there are things happening in the room and you're missing out on things. I mean, it gave you like a location, but you still don't know. You don't even know who's in the room. So you're trying to match voices. From a visually impaired blind standpoint, my ability to be able to recognize a voice is heightened, and I'm really trying to follow actors' voices through films. But even that, it's really hard to figure out which characters are even in a scene sometimes without the audio description telling you. So great audio description usually is able to tell you who's in the scene, where the scene is. They catch the transitions so that if you are changing location, you know that you've changed location, so that way things don't get too confusing. I just saw a movie that really made good use of just adjectives in general, letting you know what people's facial expressions look like and their reactions, silent reactions to things, the decisions that actors make, like actors' choices to be able to react to something, the colors of things, set design, scenery. I think in films that are quieter and have less dialogue, it really opens up the opportunity for more of that kind of thing. And in fast-paced, dialogue-heavy films, maybe not so much. So it's good audio description can actually vary on the projects. You have to look at what could they possibly have done, and if they could have done it better, then it was bad. Like if the film had plenty of open time to fill with audio description, then the audio description was not complete. It did not give you enough of the setting, even though there are plenty of times when no one's talking, nothing's happening, and there's no audio description. But at the same time, another film that is constant dialogue, how can you get mad at a lack of audio description? Like, what do you want? The audio description to talk on top of dialogue? Nobody really wants that. So it actually changes from film to film and also genre to genre. You know, in horror films, you always want to make sure that you know the scare, but you also want to protect the jump scare. So you have to keep the moment. Every once in a while, I catch a horror film that I guess because of the loudness of the scene will give you the jump scare actually before it happens. So it'll say like so-and-so burst through a window and it's like 2 seconds pass and then the thing actually bursts through the window. And it's kind of like a little bit of a spoiler for the scene that way. So it's very different, and it totally depends on the content that you're watching, which is what I found is so really interesting as I dive into reviewing audio description. Is there is no one perfect way of saying this is great, this is how you do audio description, this is the Bible of audio description, because each film is so different and each audio description has to match the film. So there can't just be one answer to everything. I hope that answered.
It's one of the best answers I've heard.
No, that was a little long-winded, but
But you covered the points. I mean, from the spectrum of varying, you literally said every film is different, that there are so many temptations for either audiences or maybe creators, in both cases, who may not be aware that there is no one size fits all. And you addressing this in such a clear way that, you know, everyone wants a perfect guidebook where it's always got to be this. It's relative. And I think that's where your criticisms, your reviews come in so handy, because you're bringing a creative element in how you review these films, because you do understand the context of film because of your film studies and your experiences, that you do understand
yeah.
this is what good. And, you know, the question was, how do you trust AD? And you answered it by saying it varies and it depends. So let's talk about your reviews. When you go in to watch a movie, do you come into it with assumptions? Do you come into a film based on maybe you already know a little bit about it, maybe you might know nothing about it? What's your approach when you want to share your reviews with people before you even start the film?
A lot of times I watch movies I know nothing about or I know very little about. I don't necessarily research them, to be totally honest, because of trailers are not necessarily the most accessible thing in the world, I don't find it fun to just listen to trailers. So that's one thing that's changed for me is before I used to watch a lot of movie trailers. So now I feel like I'm jumping into a lot of films and I might know who's in it and I might know the director. And maybe I have a loose description of the plot, or I might have heard critics are kind of liking it or they hate it or something like that. But I'm actually going in knowing a lot less than what I used to about films just because I don't feel the need to track down trailers anymore. I know every once in a while we get one that is audio described, and that's nice, but there's so many, and they're not all audio described. I don't feel the need to ever align myself with other critics. So if I like a film and I think it's a film that critics will hate, I have no problem giving it a good review. The most recent review that I did currently, at least as of this taping that's up on my YouTube, is of a film that currently has a 12% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I just gave it a B grade,
Wow.
which would be like the equivalent of giving like a fresh score. So if I enjoyed it, I enjoyed it. It doesn't matter whether or not other people didn't enjoy it or whether or not I think other people won't enjoy it. I have to say, yeah, I liked it and you might like it too. I don't go into films with that idea that, oh, so-and-so's in it. This is not going to be good. You know, I try to always keep an open mind and wait for a film to surprise me.
Very cool. Thank you for that. And it sounds like going into that with a little bit more of an open mind, in spite of challenges with the trailers, that there are some opportunities there, and it shouldn't be that way. You should have the choice to be able to watch the trailer or not. And you know, I'm thankful that there are some audio described trailers, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. Specifically about your audience of reading the reviews, one of the things that I really appreciated is that in your reviews you include also a review of the audio description, that's included in your review. I was curious about how that's approached. I mean, thank you, first of all. I mean, selfishly, it's like, great, we're starting to talk about what this quality and excellence means. And with the reach that you have, being able to review and include audio description, it's woven into your review. Could you talk a little bit about how you review audio description in your reviews?
Yeah. You know, the weird thing is audio description was actually what got me back into it. It's amazing how much traction I've gotten in such a short period of time. My website was up for a while, and I had other websites that no longer exist and have fallen off the face of the planet. But finally, in 2013, I actually bought my own domain name and started my website. But then my blindness started in 2017. I was diagnosed and started losing my vision really fast. And I ended up stopping the writing of my reviews. And I had a lot of thoughts about how I shouldn't be reviewing a film because I can't see all of it. Like, I don't have the ability to talk about the visual effects and the cinematography and costume design and production design and all the stuff that I would have been able to talk about before. So I allowed myself to stop, and this thing that I actually went to school for, that it's all I ever wanted to do. Like, my life goal is to be on Rotten Tomatoes and be an actual certified critic and stuff. And I just allowed that to drift away from me. And then somebody just kind of said, that my perspective was unique. And I thought, I don't think there is anybody out there that's actually talking about the audio description, reviewing it from a blind film critic standpoint. And it was the audio description portion of it that really got me back into it. That's what made me want to do this all again and to get back into it. Was I felt like there was nobody out there that was trying to help the blind community say, okay, so this film has good audio description. This film could have better audio description. Even films without audio description, some of them are actually mostly watchable and followable. I know that's taboo to say, but dialogue-heavy movies, I'll give an example of a film that I didn't miss the audio description, was Mass. It's a film, it's basically four people in a room talking. I didn't really need to know what the room looked like because everything that really matters in that film is just picked up in the dialogue between those four actors.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a play in that sense. It's just four people in a room talking for 2 hours. And it's so minimalistic that it's so easy to follow. But other films are like a nightmare. I tried to watch The Humans, which is another film, because I had heard it was a play on Broadway and that Richard Jenkins was repeating his thing. And I was like, oh, I like him as an actor. So I tried watching it. And then before I went to review it, I found out that there were like ghosts in the film. And I didn't pick up on that at all.
Wow.
From watching the film, that there were like ghosts, that there were, it was like also like a ghost story, and there were ghosts walking around in the background and stuff. And I was like, I can't review this because I never saw those ghosts. And there was no audio description. Yeah. Sometimes you can't. It's very different, but I love trying to dive in there and help my community. Now that this is my community, now that I'm a part of it, just give some point of reference to the people out there, because in the time that I've been doing this, I've heard so many blind people they give up, either because of lack of audio description or bad audio description. They try to watch an action film and they feel like the fight sequences aren't well described enough, or they try to watch a science fiction film and they feel like the science fiction elements aren't described well enough for them to be immersed in the experience. So they just read a book. And as a cinema lover, it just hurts. And because I want people to enjoy. So I'm trying to get out there and promote and be like, no, we can still do this. We just got to find the right titles. We got to talk about what good audio description is and advocate for that, and advocate for as much audio description as possible in everything, whatever we can get.
What a great answer. And I was going to ask what you would like your audiences to know, and that was so clearly said. If I could ask you what you would say to the Rotten Tomatoes team, what would you want them to know that they might not know?
I think what's really interesting is when I applied before, I remember one of the things that they look for in a critic when you apply is having a unique voice. And I think back in the day, I probably didn't have a unique voice. When you think about how many people have movie blogs and don't have a unique perspective, and it's like, now I do have a unique perspective, but I also don't know how they would feel about it. I have no idea. It's a niche audience that I reach, but I'd love to be, I'd love for my scores to count on the tomato meter. I'd love to be a part of, their online film critics society and get into that. So that would be amazing. But, and to have that sort of representation and acceptance for our community, to say that no, blind people can watch movies too, and so can deaf people. I think if there's somebody out there like me who's deaf and is writing reviews about closed captioning, put them up there. Inclusivity. Everybody watched Coda and they loved the inclusivity, and they all cheered on Troy Kotsur when he won Best Supporting Actor. Well, now it's time to actually do something about it. If you love the inclusivity, here's your chance. So,
great answer. And for our audience's sake, you are Mac the movie guy. Your name's John Stark. Can you let our audiences know about Mac? Is there anything you'd like to share about where that name came from?
Oh, yeah, it's actually a long story. I've been Mac the movie guy for a long time.
Uh-huh.
I was back in high school, and I lived in a small town. It was back in the 90s, and my small town hadn't even gotten internet yet. And I was visiting a friend, and he set me up with my first email account, and it was this Mac Daddy NLS, and NLS stood for No Limit Soldier because he thought he was gangster, so he set up my first thing, and his was like James Bond NLS, and the two of us had this thing with this NLS, and I seemed far more gangster than I actually did. But sort of really quickly, I realized that every time I was trying to tell somebody what my email address was, I was like, Mac Daddy NLS, I feel really stupid saying this. So as the internet came to me, I ended up in like movie forums. I actually ended up in screenwriting games in their forums, and I needed a username. And I kept the Mac, and I just put the movie guy. It started because one of my friends gave me this ridiculous email address, and I just kept the Mac part. And it's been that way for like at least 25 years. So the history of the internet could trace me back deep into the 90s as Mac the movie guy. So
That's great. Oh, thank you for
yeah,
that. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
yeah, I would say if you are listening to this and you are visually abled, I would encourage you to watch a film without audio description with your eyes closed. Just pick a film and see what that experience is like for you. I would say it's probably better if it's a film you've never seen before and see how well you can follow it. And then you'll understand the importance of audio description because that's what it's like. Sometimes you stumble into a film like Mass that just because it's so limited in its scale and is seeking to achieve nothing except emotionally impacting you through dialogue, that it can sort of be that 1%, of films that work without it. But the majority of films, you're going to miss out on so much. Even if you can kind of follow it, you still find yourself missing out on things. And you're like, oh, what's happening in the scene? Or, oh, did that character just die? What happened to that one guy? I noticed he just stopped appearing halfway through the film. I don't know, where did he go? I would just encourage anybody who can see to just close their eyes and watch an entire movie. Try not to fall asleep, obviously, and then if you really want to know what it's like, you can watch a movie and then turn on audio description, and you'll understand what it is that we experience in the blind and visually impaired community and why it's so important. I've heard from many people that they like to leave audio description on simply because of how the narration enhances their viewing experience. Just sighted people, once they've used audio description with a blind person, they realize it's actually somehow makes their experience better, even though they don't need it. So it's really such a great thing. And we're lagging behind. The deaf community has far more closed caption things than the blind community does audio described. So it would be nice if we could get a little bit more equality in that area. There are entire cable channels and premium networks that are seemingly exempt from offering audio description. It would be really nice to, be able to do something like subscribe to Stars and watch Outlander with audio description and some of their other shows. But they're not legally required to. It would be nice if we could switch that around. So just advocate for audio description as much as you can, and the narrators and the writers that take the time to sit down and try to figure out how to write the script and make it so that, the millions of Americans that are living with visual impairment or blindness have as many accessible titles to them as possible. And let's go back and actually, instead of just making like new titles when they come out, let's go back and add library titles, because I do kind of miss watching films that weren't made like within the last 10 years. It seems like the farther you go back, the less audio described titles there are, and the more sort of random it is. Like you might get some titles in there. So if you end up being one of those people who really is into classic movies, good luck, because it's very hit and miss. So yeah, just continue to advocate for audio description. And I know my community knows the importance of audio description, and support those who do it. Support the streaming services that pour their money into audio description, and call out the ones when they don't. That's probably the most frustrating thing to me, is when I see a title that I know has audio description on a service and they just didn't bother to pick it up. They didn't bother to access the already available audio description that somebody went to the trouble to make, somebody went to the trouble to pay for, and they won't license it or pay for it or seek to acquire it. They just don't care. And I've seen this a lot recently. I know this is like the longest answer ever, but I've seen this a lot recently with a lot of similar drops that have happened on Hulu and HBO Max at the same time, where HBO Max will have audio description on the title and Hulu won't. They've done that a couple times. Nightmare Alley was dropped at like the same time, and Death on the Nile. And Hulu is always just like, whatever, audio description. They just don't just don't bother. That HBO Max has been pretty good about making sure they get the audio description. So call out the services when they don't bother to do just the basic need of allowing us to be able to watch the titles that we're paying a subscription for. I'm paying the same price as somebody who can see, but I have far less titles accessible to me. And it's not like Hulu's going to offer me a discount. So just keep advocating for audio description anywhere you can. That's my thing.
John, if we go back to your friend that set up your email address, the no limit soldier seems to take on a different meaning just based on your answer and this interview. So what a premonition here.
Absolutely.
And finally, how can we follow you? We've already mentioned the website and YouTube, Mac the Movie Guy. Can you give specifics for our audience so they can follow along?
Yeah, definitely check out macthemovieguy.com. That's my blog that I have all my written reviews on. If you like reading, that would be where to go. You can follow me on Twitter. Handle there is @MacTheMovieGuy. You can like my page on Facebook. That's also Mac the Movie Guy. And definitely check out my video reviews on YouTube. They're not fancy. I have not quite mastered the art of being blind and doing video editing yet. So they're pretty much just me talking into my iPhone. But if you want to hear this nice voice do some audio reviews on YouTube, you can subscribe to me on YouTube at Mac the Movie Guy also, youtube.com/Mac the Movie Guy.
Very cool. And it's great to see what you're doing with the platform and elevating what quality movie reviews means, and the accessibility factor obviously is something that we really care about too. So this is a great interview, John. Thank you. Thank you for everything that you shared in this.